Good morning. It's Richard Blackaby on the Tuesday Morning Devotionals. I'm glad that you could join me again. We've had a great time and had some wonderful feedback from folks who've tuned in. I know some Bible study groups, even up in the Red Deer, Alberta, Canada area, that are using this devotional as an opportunity to discuss afterward some of the things that were said. And so let us know if you're making use of this teaching and how you are, and that always is delightful for us to hear that and encourages us. I'm going to be talking for the next 2 weeks at least, well, to see how much progress I make, on a book that I wrote a couple of years ago called The Seasons of God. So of course we're going to give this book away near the end of my talks. We'll open it up to some questions, and so if you have a question, go ahead, as soon as it comes to your mind as I'm talking, just go ahead and type that into the notes, the comment area, and then again, we'll do a drawing on whoever's questions I get to, and we'll give away a free book. And we've had a lot of Canadians lately that have been winning these books, and that costs us a lot in shipping. So I want the Americans to step up and help us out here to cut down on our shipping costs. We may have to send our Canadians, Australian listeners, a link to a video or an audio book, perhaps. But nonetheless, send in your questions, and we'll get to you. And so this book, The Seasons of God, is what it's based on. And if you haven't read that, it's a different kind of book, one that talks a lot about our life and what we've experienced with that, and I think you'll enjoy it. Certainly, as we kind of get into it today, you'll get a sense of what we're talking about. I remember when several years ago, my wife and I moved with our family to Cochrane, Alberta, in Canada. We lived in Winnipeg, which is considered the coldest city in North America. And we moved to Cochrane, and we were renting a house at first while we were looking for a house to buy. And eventually we found a house in January. And we were told it's probably not wise to buy a house in the winter because you don't really see what the yard looks like. Nothing's growing. You could have snow covering the property, and so you don't know exactly what you're purchasing. But we liked the house itself, and we decided to buy it. We moved in on February 1st, and it was actually 40 below zero the day we moved in. You can tell who your really good friends are by who's willing to help you move a piano into your house at 40 below zero. Well, we got in and we were enjoying the house, waiting for spring to come. And I was hoping and praying that when spring came, all kinds of roses and all kinds of great flowers would just be bursting forth all over the property. But spring came and nothing is bursting forth except dandelions and other kinds of weeds. And one thing you discovered in that part of the world is that you didn't even really put plants out until June 15th because the frost would come so late. And so people we didn't even know this, but down in their basements and other places, they're already begun growing their plants. And then June 15th, everything comes out. And so one day, our yard looks miserable just like everyone else's. And then June 15th, all of a sudden, there's all these beautiful flower gardens everywhere, and now we're the eyesore of the whole community. Everybody's giving us these looks like they're trying to figure out how much their property value has devalued since we've moved into the neighborhood. So I did something I'd never done before. My wife and I went to a local nursery, and I actually paid money for dirt. I bought a truckload of topsoil, bought a bunch of plants and fertilizer. We built a little mound in our front yard. Lisa's fertilizing it every day. And I still remember the day we came home, and I'm looking over this mound, and now it's covered with flowers. It's just beautiful. And we're quite proud of ourselves. In fact, our little community had a local newspaper, and each week it would list the top 10 yards to see. We didn't even have a movie theater back then, so you didn't have much to get entertained with, and so you went and looked at pretty yards. And that week we'd made it into the top 10, so we knew we'd arrived. This was like a highlight in our family life at that point. So we're having dinner, and all of a sudden I hear a knock. And at first I assume it must be a knock on the door. Someone must be coming to thank us for beautifying the community. But then I keep hearing this knocking, and I'm beginning to get a little worried. I rush out to the front of my house, open the door, and I witness the worst hailstorm that community has ever suffered. In fact, when it was done, every house in our entire subdivision had to have its shingles replaced because it was just devastating. And these huge hailstones are coming down and just pulverizing all the plants. And I look in horror at this mound of beautiful flowers, and it looks like a terrorist is unloading a machine gun on all my daffodils and all my plants, and it was devastating. And then I hear a scream, and I realize my wife now has joined me, and she is seeing her all of her labor is just being pulverized. And she looked at me and she said what wives have been saying to husbands for thousands of years. She said, "Don't just stand there, do something." And I'll never forget trying to think in desperation whether I should rush out into that maelstrom and just kind of hold my body over what remaining flowers were left to try to save them. But it was soon too late. We lost everything. All over that street, people are just devastated. And as Lisa and I are later processing what had happened in our experience, we realized that we had made actually a pretty big decision in the middle of winter, which sometimes can be precarious. Spring had come and we weren't ready for it. And summer came, and one hailstorm and so much of our labor seemed to have been lost. And I realized we really had not been handling our seasons very well. And I discovered as I thought about it that a lot of people's lives are that way as well. There's a time for planting and spring times in our life, a time of beginnings. And a lot of times people miss those moments where God wanted to do something new. And there's times of summer where you want to grow, you want to mature, you want to develop, and yet if you're not careful, there's a lot of things that can discourage you along the way. Winter is a time of endings, and harvest time comes as well in the fall. And each of these seasons are important in nature, and I came to realize they're also important in life. And so I want us just to be taking a week or two to talk about seasons. And I want to begin in a very well-known passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 to 11. And we'll kind of get into the introduction to this today, and then we're going to get into more specifics next week. And so I want you to just to be thinking, and I'm just going to put out a question for you right off the bat, and that is, what season are you in right now? Because if you don't know what season you're in, you may be caught off guard as well. You may be unprepared. And those people that I have seen who are most successful in life are the people who know what season they're in, and they're making whatever adjustments they need to for that particular season. So Ecclesiastes 3, beginning in verse 1, it says, "To everything there is a season." Now this is the New King James translation. Some translations use they don't use the word season, but in the King James, New King James, and some other translations like that, it kind of captures the idea. And it says, to everything there's a season. And we'll get into that in more detail next week. But what that's saying is every part of your life has a season to it, which means that life is changing, that life doesn't stay the same. And I'll just tell you, when I was becoming an adult, I was taught a lot of things, but no one ever taught me that my life flowed through seasons. I thought life would kind of always be the same. Church would be the same, family would be the same, marriage would be the same, work would be the same. You just kind of jumped on the treadmill, and then life was the same for the next several decades. And then every time things would change, you'd get confused, and you'd wonder, did I make a mistake? Is God punishing me? Did I do something wrong? Why is my relationship with my children changing? Why is my marriage changing? Why is it that all of a sudden I'm not content in my job anymore? And what Scripture says is everything in your life has a season to it. And if you understand that, and you understand how God works, you won't be caught by surprise when life happens. Even this pandemic that we're in right now, if you understand life has its seasons, some are more difficult than others. Some are more attractive and enjoyable than others. But no matter what you're going through at the moment, just understand this: it will pass, and something new will come. You don't need to panic. You need to realize over the years, A lot of seasons in life have come and a lot have gone. And you just try to see, what is it God's doing in this season? Let me get all out of it that I can, because I know that another season is coming. And so it says, to everything there's a season. And then it says there's a time for every purpose under heaven. And I have studied, as you know, a lot of biographies, and I'm a history major. I study leaders, people who've made a difference. And one of the things I've discovered about people that are very successful is that they have an impeccable sense of timing. And what I've learned in life is, it's not enough just to do the right thing. You need to do the right thing. But in addition to that, you also need to do the right thing at the right time. It's possible to do the right thing at the wrong time. You might do something that's right to do, it's just that you did it too late. Sometimes that can be like an apology. You got around to apologizing months after you should have said you were sorry. Now the damage is done. The relationship is wounded. You did the right thing, just too late. Sometimes you do the right thing, but you do it too soon. You're not ready yet. You don't have the maturity yet. You don't have the relationship yet. People don't trust you yet. I see this sometimes with pastors who come to a church and too early they begin making changes. Now they needed to make the changes. They just didn't have the people's trust yet to do it. They did it too soon. And so what Ecclesiastes is saying very wisely is, there is a right time for every purpose under heaven. All the things God wants to do in your life, there's a timing for it. You don't want to be late to do it, but you also don't want to be too early. And I would just add that if you really want success in life, you need to do the right thing, you need to do it at the right time, and you also need to do it in the right way. You can do the right thing, but do it the wrong way. And I've known many people who said, I thought God wanted me to do this, but when I did it, it blew up in my face. People got upset with me. It didn't work out. I don't understand it. I thought God wanted me to do that. And oftentimes I'll respond, well, but did you do it at the right time? Did you do it the right way? When you get those three lining up together, now you've got a recipe for success. And so notice in this very famous passage, we'll just kind of look at a couple of these. You'll notice they're all in pairs. And so verse 2 says there's a time to be born and a time to die. Now, what you'll notice about all these pairs is that one is more attractive than the other. We'd rather be born than die. But what Ecclesiastes is saying is that in the course of a healthy life, both of those events are important. Both of those have a timing of God. God has a time for you to be born. He also has a time for you to die. And you need to embrace both as the will of God when that time comes. And trust God in His timing. But I think beyond that, what this also teaches me is that there's a time for things to begin, and there's a time for things to end. And there's a time to create something new, start something new, maybe a tradition in your family, maybe starting a new job, maybe a new habit. There are times in our life where we realize, I need to do a new thing. But there's also times when you may have been doing the same thing for the last 10 years. You might have been serving on a committee in your church. You might have been doing a particular hobby or a certain kind of vacation, certain activities with your kids. And then one year you just realize, you know what? I know we've done this for 10 years. I know that it's been fun and enjoyable, but I just think it's time that we bring this activity to an end. And I'll just tell you, I was never taught to end anything. No one ever told me how to recognize when an activity's lifespan had come to the end. I was encouraged to start things. I was given no help to know when to end something. And all the rewards come in starting, not in ending. If you go and you're at a staff meeting and people ask what you did and you say, oh, I ended 3 programs, I let 2 people go, I stopped all these things, no one's going to put you up for promotion for ending things. And yet, what this is saying is, it's just as much a part of God's will to end something as it is to start something. And a question that I would leave with you today is there something in your life that God is telling you it's time to bring it to a close? And it may not be a sin. It may not be a bad thing. It may actually have been a really good thing that for the last 5, 10, 15 years has blessed you and others. But God says, but you know what? Its time has come. Its day is done. Now, when you put one thing to an end, it frees up time and space and finances in your life for God now to do something new. Some of us, the reason that nothing new is happening is because we've not yet put anything to an end. And so both of those go together. A time to be born, a time to die. There's a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. Now again, we'd rather pluck. We'd rather have a harvest than plant seeds. You can plant 1 million seeds one day in the farm, and at the end of a hard day's work, you can't eat a thing, even though you put all those seeds out in the ground. That's because there are seasons where you just need to plant, seasons you need to look to the future. And then there's days where the harvest comes in, and then you just pick with both hands. And I've seen this sometimes, for instance, again with pastors, where they come to a church and they've been there a month, and now they're discouraged because no one has become a Christian, no one has walked the aisle, it doesn't seem like attendance is growing, and they're discouraged. I've been here a whole month, and where's the harvest? And I would say, well, if you're in a time of planting, then you shouldn't be looking for plucking, and you shouldn't be discouraged when there's no plucking going on, when maybe this is a seed planting time. Sometimes the reason we don't have more of a harvest is we haven't taken enough time to plant. And so don't be discouraged when God so that may mean taking some classes. It may mean upgrading some skills. It might mean reading some books. It might mean joining an organization. Times where you better yourself, where you learn new things, where you gain new experiences and skills. And you can't necessarily see a payoff right away, but it's not meant for a payoff time right now. It's meant for planting, where you invest in the possibilities for your future. But a time will come where it's appropriate to pluck and where the harvest time comes. There's several, I won't touch on all these just for the sake of time, but verse 3 says there's a time to break down and a time to build up. And again, I'll tell you, my nature is always to build up. I'm a leader, I'm a fixer, I love turning things around. You put me in an organization that's seen better days, it's struggling. I look around and anything that's kind of broken down, I want to build up right away. And one thing that I was not helped to do earlier on in life was to stop and ask the question, well, does this need to be built up? Maybe the reason it's broken down is because its time has come to an end. Sometimes you can look at activities that just aren't as fulfilling as they used to be, not as productive as they used to be. And so our first thought is, well, how can I beef this up? How can I invest more into it to make it better? And God might say, well, you don't need to do that. You actually need to take it apart, put it away, so you've got room and space now for me to do something brand new. Sometimes I think we beat ourselves up because some things are broken down in our life, and God would say, well, there's a reason it's broken down. It's because its time has passed. Don't spend a lot of money trying to build up something that God says it's time just to disassemble and put it away. By the way, just remind you again, in just a moment, I'm going to try to take a question or two from you. So if you have a question, you want a free book on the seasons of God, put that in there, and I'm going to get to those in just a second. But as we keep on going through Ecclesiastes 3, verse 4 says there's a time to weep and there's a time to laugh. I'll tell you what, you might think to yourself, well, that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? We should always laugh instead of weep. Or some people are stuck on weeping, and God would say, hey, you're way past due to be doing some laughing. I found with this COVID-19 that this has kind of been confusing for some people. If you try to make light, if you try to put a joke on Facebook, or you try to just say something kind of funny in a Zoom meeting, you may have some of these people that very self-righteously tell you, this is no time to be joking. Do you know all the suffering that's going on? And so you try to think, okay, we just need to be very serious. But I found that in human nature, the way we're wired, God wired us to have a sense of humor. In fact, I think that's one of our survival mechanisms when things are bad. It doesn't mean that you're making light of the situation. Humor often just indicates you still have hope, that you're still striving to find something positive in the midst of a lot of negative. It doesn't mean that you don't care about people suffering and the negative things that are happening. But I found the people that oftentimes in history have been the most successful in crises have been the people who also knew there was a time to laugh and a time to weep. There is a time to weep, and in those moments, humor would be inappropriate. But oftentimes, in the midst of crisis, what will get you through is still being able to laugh. My mother and dad had a philosophy that before they went to bed every night, they wanted to at least laugh once about something. It was considered a failure of a day if they got in bed at night and realized that in the stress and the strain and the work throughout the day that they had not laughed about anything the entire day. So know that there's occasions for both, weeping and laughing. And if you find yourself just doing all of one or the other, then maybe you need to be watching and you may be missing some opportunities. Verse 5 says there's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And again, that seems a little counterintuitive. We assume, well, especially here in the South, you need to hug everybody. You need to embrace everyone. But what God is saying here is there are times to enter into a relationship with people, to trust people, to bring people close into your life. And then there's a time not to do that. I would say some of the worst mistakes that I've made have been in perhaps trusting people more than I should have. Sometimes I would say in leading organizations, one of my perhaps biggest mistakes has been hiring the best available person. Have you ever done that? If you've been in a management position where you had to fill a vacancy, so you look at you look at applications and so on and resumes and you sort through them and find the best candidates, and finally you put the top 3 candidates on the table, you pray over each one, you interview each of them, and then you decide which of these is the best person. And then you hire them. I've done that often. I have this strong need for closure where if I forgot a job to do, let's get it done, let's finish it. And so I need to hire someone, I'll hire this person. The problem is that sometimes the best person wasn't yet available. I hired the best available person, but the best person wasn't available yet. Their resume wasn't on the table yet. And so I embraced the wrong person. I hired the wrong person. At times people marry the wrong people. They embrace too soon. They didn't do due diligence. They should have maybe dated a little bit longer, or they should have heeded those red flags that they were noticing about this person's character or about their temper or the way that they treated them. But they thought it would be fine, and they embraced too soon. I've known Christian business people that partnered with someone, and later it was a disaster. And there were warning signs that maybe they shouldn't embrace quite so soon. But they thought, but they're Christian. We seem to have the same philosophy of business. And they embraced, much to their regret later. And then lastly, maybe just let me look at perhaps one other, and that is there's also, verse 7 says, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. I've known some people who've never heard that there's a time to keep silence. There's some people who love to talk all the time. But what God has convicted me of is that sometimes the most powerful thing that I'll ever say is when I say nothing, when I just remain silent and just let what I've already said hang there in front of people. Or maybe a truth has been shared, and now anything I say is just going to be less than what's already been out there. And silence can be very powerful. And learn to trust silence. Learn to let silence do some of the heavy lifting in your life. No, there's a time, now by the way, there's a time also to speak up. And for you introverts oftentimes have got some of the best insights, the best thoughts, but you keep letting all the extroverts do the talking. Sometimes you need to speak up. I talk to so many people who have such wisdom, and afterward, my wife will do this sometimes, and we'll be going home, or afterwards she'll comment. I'll say, well, why didn't you say that? That was the smartest thing that would have been said the whole meeting. But well, I didn't know I had anything to say or whatever else. And so what I've learned is there is a time to speak up. Don't miss that moment when perhaps the most important thing that'll be said is what you're about to say. I know introverts especially tend to agonize about, well, is this a valuable contribution? Is this worth saying? Well, what will people think of me if I say that? And so sometimes the most important things never get said. And then and other people are speaking way too much and not really contributing anything, and they just need to be silent and leave it at that. And maybe just last to say that there's a time to love and a time to hate. Can I just tell you that we assume that we're supposed to love everything, love every person, but there are some things that God hates. God hates oppression. God hates dishonesty. God hates evil. God hates when innocent people are harmed. There are some things God, and hate just is a way, there's a holy kind of hate, which means you just feel very strongly against things. And I've learned that I want to love everything that God loves, and I want to hate everything that God hates. And so sometimes we don't hate the wrong things enough. We're a little too lenient. We're a little too laissez-faire about things that could harm our family or harm my walk with God. And those things I need to feel very strongly against, just the way that God does. Well, I see we have a couple questions coming in here. Stanley's got a great question. Can a change of season involve stepping away from a call to be a full-time pastor? And next week I'm going to get into that. I'm going to talk very specifically about spring times of beginnings, winter times of endings. But I would say yes. Something my dad taught me, Stanley, is that our primary call is not to a vocation. It's not, a lot of people say, God called me to be a senior pastor. Well, what God really called you to do is to follow him, to be a disciple. Jesus did not come by Peter and Andrew's boat and say, come be a full-time apostle. He said, come follow me. Now, in following Jesus, they became apostles. They became evangelists. They became preachers. But that was out of their following him. And so you're always going to be called to follow Jesus. But sometimes when you look at the fruit of your life, you just realize, I feel like this calling, God's changing some things. I don't have the joy that I used to have. I'm not seeing the fruit I used to have. I don't have the passion, the vision for this ministry that I once had. I just sense that God's releasing me from this. And I sense that perhaps he has something else for me. We can feel like failures for that. But just remember, your primary calling is to follow him. And if he's leading you to a new assignment, he never takes you away from something without bringing you to something else. So if you're being taken away, also be watching for what he's taking you to. Verna says, do we typically experience one overarching season in our lives, or can we experience various seasons in different areas? Example, winter in our spiritual life while experiencing a spring season in our career. And again, I go into a lot of detail on that in this book. I think we have at least the 4 primary seasons that we know of in North America, and I think those seasons are going to rotate. You're not primarily a springtime. We may have some seasons we enjoy more. We may really be springtime people who are entrepreneurial and always like to start new things, but there will be a summer season that comes where instead of starting new things, we need to help flourish what already is there. And then a winter comes, and it's time to bring an end to some of those things we started. So I think that you're going to experience all 4 of those seasons, and you're going to experience them multiple times. You may have a number of spring times in your life and a number of winter times in your life. And I'll go into more detail of that next week. And then Susan says, I live in constant fear of not measuring up. My career changed, and then I took a step back from leadership to become a team member. And finding that I'm folding under the pressure to produce. Some days I'm brilliant. Some days I feel like I'm out of touch. How do I find out if God is telling me to move along? Well, again, I'm going to go into a little more detail on that next week. Just because you're going through a difficult time doesn't mean God is bringing an end to that. But you do want to look at your fruitfulness. Maybe this is a time of growth. Oftentimes, especially when we start something new, spring times are kind of terrifying because it's new. We haven't done this before. We don't know that we may have to develop skills and expertise. It may be trial and error. So at the beginning, oftentimes you're going to have more mistakes, more failures. You haven't done this before. You got to give yourself some slack in a springtime while you learn what you're supposed to be doing. But then summer comes, and that's a time of just practice and maturing and growth and laboring and sweat and toil, work. But harvest is when you finally get things figured out. And that might be a number of years down the road. It's kind of like parenting. When you first become a parent, you don't even know how to change a diaper necessarily. You every time the child is crying in the night, you worry something's wrong. But over those summer seasons of parenting, you start to learn. When you race them to the hospital for every little thing, you realize, okay, maybe I don't need to panic. And eventually you get to a harvest time. Maybe you're walking that little baby daughter down the aisle to get married now. Maybe you're being promoted into management now. And you realize, boy, I tell you what, I remember back when I was starting out and how bad it seemed. And I was ready to quit every day. But I hung in there. I put in my summer months of sweat and toil. And now, praise God, I'm in management. And I love what I do. And then even when you're doing very well in your job, winter will eventually come and God will say, oh, that's great. I'm glad you've had a great ride, but it's time to do something new. And so great questions. And I'm going to get into more detail about what spring looks like, summer, fall, winter looks like in life and give you some very practical applications. But I just want to kind of introduce this theme to you today. Hope you can come back next Tuesday at 10 o'clock Eastern time again. And we'll pick up on this and we'll look at, we'll start with springtime. And just know this, God has a number of springtimes for you. Like I said, I used to live in Winnipeg, the coldest city in North America. It had a year where it was 40 below zero for 40 days in a row. I'll tell you what, it seemed like winter was never going to end. It seemed like God had run out of springtimes. But inevitably, God has another springtime, another season of beginnings, of newness. And so if you're in a hard place right now, you're holding on, thinking life is just getting pretty difficult, just know that God is a God of springtimes. And He'll have some more for you. Just let God do whatever work He's wanting to do in the season you're in right now. And when you finish that, you'll have the next season right on schedule with all that God intends for it. So thanks for joining us today. It's always good to be with you. Thanks for joining in. And I always, afterward, I go back and I check the chat and comment and see who's there when I can't always keep looking down while I'm talking with you. But I just want you to know when I love to see who's joined in and who's commented. I'll try to comment back later today. So thanks for joining in. And this week, keep your eyes open and take time to reflect on your life and ask the question, what season am I in? And we'll talk more about that next week.